I recently finished the anime Frieren Beyond Journey's End, and as most other people would agree, I thought it was really good. I could say pretty much what anyone else would say about the matter, you know? It's a really pretty show with great art, fluid animation, an amazing soundtrack, impressive characterization, development, etc. But beyond those aspects, there is one particular thing that I noticed with this series, and that's just how thought-provoking it can be at times. There are many moments and interactions between characters in this series that make it very clear that this show isn't trying to hide its heavy reliance on themes. I mean, it's a show about an elf who doesn't understand human tendencies, and I really don't know how much deeper you can get than trying to familiarize yourself with the essence of what it means to be human. Even in the very first episode, there are these hints of regret, acceptance, and growth that are portrayed through our elven main character, Frieren. And it almost seems as if moving forward, every episode seeks to leave you with something, as you'll find yourself thinking about what you just watched and how it resonates with you. Given the premise of the show, we as the viewers are essentially re-exploring our own habits and patterns through a not-so-human viewpoint. And I find that a very fresh and unique perspective to write a story from. Moreover, what stands out to me more than anything is the show's use of time. It wouldn't be accurate to say that the show uses time itself as a theme though, rather as a tool to convey those other themes. You see, the biggest contributing factor as to why Frieren and other elves in general don't really understand humans and their ways is that they simply have longer lifespans. Much longer lifespans. Humans have this phrase, don't take things for granted. And with time, it's evolved from a simple phrase into a way of life. The average human life expectancy from birth is around 72 years, and the amount of time an individual lives would of course greatly influence their idea of what they consider a large or small amount of time, the significance of their actions, the impact they will leave, and other things of that nature. Elves, however, don't have that. Since they live a very, very long time, they have all the time in the world to accrue countless invaluable experiences that we would probably consider once in a lifetime. It's this differential in life expectancy that greatly changes the perspectives of not only elves and humans, but also other races such as dwarves and demons. And the anime has such a subtle yet simplistically beautiful way of portraying this idea. Take, for example, the momentous occasion of the hero's party defeating the Demon King after an arduous 10-year voyage, something that everyone would agree deserved great recognition and celebration. Everyone save for Frieren, of course. To her, it was the equivalent of an average week for us. A mere 10-year adventure, in her own words. Over the course of her life, the hands of rulership ought to have changed countless times, making this an accomplishment of not much renown. Furthermore, in her decision to travel after separating from her group, she decides to not take on an apprentice to travel with. She considered it to be a waste of time teaching someone who would die within a fraction of her lifetime. In not having to live with the fragility or shortness of the human lifespan, Frieren at the beginning of her story is fundamentally incapable of viewing her own deeds with the same amount of weight that anyone else would, and who could blame her? One of the core reasons we as humans find beauty in simplicity is because of how ephemeral our lives are. The older we get, the more we realize just how fast time passes us by. 10 years ago can sometimes feel like it was only yesterday, and like fireworks, we try to burn as brightly and brilliantly as we can, despite our short-lasted nature. But I would imagine that the longer one lives, the less significance they would inevitably view their actions with. So what happens when you take a being who will live for over 1,000 years easily, put them in a group of humans, and have them get along like family, sharing hardships and laughs over the course of 10 years?
In all truthfulness, I hardly knew anything about him. Years with him wasn't nearly enough time to learn. I was aware that human lives are short, but this... Why didn't I try to better know and understand you?
Influence is the only word that can truly describe the effect that Eisen, Heiter, and Himmel had on Frieren. It only took the passing of one of those who were close to her to flip her world upside down and to make her feel that what she thought wasn't right at all. Suddenly, there was a reason to check up on them regularly, a reason to spend quality time with them, a reason to get to know them better, and so much more. And poetically, that reason is the very same one that drove her thought process of none of that ever mattering to begin with. That reason being to cherish the lives of those close to her and make something beautiful of them. This is what the story consistently attempts to drive through to the viewer. From the moment of Himmel's death, her mindset begins to shift slowly but steadily. She becomes more intrigued by humans and takes their perspective into deeper consideration. She's more conscious of how much time she spends on any given task, and begins to realize that a mere moment for herself is a precious thing for the human she spends that moment with. Until now, she never did much reminiscing, but finds herself thinking about the past much more than usual, about the time she spent with her party more than anything else. Things she hardly ever put much thought into before, whether that be general human tendencies or memories she made with her old friends, became fuel for deep contemplation and development. This, ultimately, conveys the message of not taking things for granted, in one of the most effective ways I've ever seen a story manage to do so. Two of my favorite scenes to come out of this anime are some of the simplest ones. Nevertheless, they hold some of the deepest meaning for me. One of them is the scene where Frieren goes out with Fern and Stark after completing a portion of the first class mage exam. In this scene, Frieren takes the two of them to a restaurant that she visited with her party back in the day. She begins to remember that moment, thinking back on how delicious the meal was back then. At that point, she was skeptical, however, that the techniques used to make the meal would persist through time, and that eventually in the future, the food would have a different taste. And so, Himmel, having the biggest crush in the world, requested that the chef somehow find a way to make the flavor of his food persist into the distant future. The chef agrees to take on that challenge, and fails in the end, but that failure was the catalyst for a happy accident of sorts. For in her eyes, even though the exact same taste didn't last, a much more ambrosial flavor took its place, and so Frieren didn't have to tackle the task of searching for something that tasted better. This scene shows that the passing of time breeds persistence, that persistence breeds evolution, and compels the idea that evolution is a very admirable thing, contrary to what Frieren used to believe. My second favorite scene is when Frieren and Fern visit a village, where they take on the task of cleaning up shipwreckage from its shoreline. They spend a couple days on this task when Frieren decides that she wants to be done with it before the New Year's festival arrives. This is because she wishes to wake up early, something she knows she'll struggle to do, and partake in the custom of welcoming the new year by watching the sunrise. She doesn't realize why she wants to do this yet, but the truth of the matter is that she held some underlying regret and not being able to experience it with her old party due to oversleeping. They believed it was something she would enjoy, and unfortunately missed out on. So, she chose to do all she could to not miss it again. At the end of the day, or the beginning I guess, she was able to see the sunrise. Though it wasn't anything exceptionally spectacular in her eyes, Fern's astonishment of the moment on the other hand was. In that instance, she received yet another example of a fleeting occurrence that humans see with so much beauty. This time round though, she was able to somewhat understand the significance of such a temporary moment in the life of someone who would live a far shorter one than her own. Now, I could get into the weeds of why sunrises elicit as much emotion as they do, and research done by scientists on how diurnal patterns and ephemeral meteorological phenomena impact appraisals of beauty, awe, and value in urban and natural landscapes, but you're not here for that, neither am I, so let's just skip over that. Point is, sunrises and sunsets by extension are pretty. They make us emotional, they make us happy, sad, they make us reminisce on the past and bring forth feelings of nostalgia and simultaneously hope, renewal, and reflection. And that emotion can be given off and felt by other individuals, which you could argue was happening with Frieren in this case. Anyways, I could say these scenes are my favorites because I love sunrises and sunsets, or because I believe in the philosophy of persistence. But beyond that, these scenes were just great examples of how the show uses time to showcase the importance of making the most of one's life, even in simple moments. But what about the important things, like cultivating a successor. As we mentioned earlier, Frieren at a point in the past saw no point in training someone who she would outlive. Even so, in realizing that it's not about how long one lives, but how much they can accomplish with their life, her mindset on that also changes. This is shown countless times in countless ways. Aura, who's lived for around 500 years, was not able to outclass Frieren in power, who's lived for over 1,000, and yet, Frieren admits to things such as not having as much potential as Fern, and also having lost to 11 mages, all of which had less mana, but superior technique to her own. 1 elf, 4 demons, and 6 humans. This series makes the point that the most unexpected of people can achieve some of the most commendable things. Frieren's master Flamma once said that the Demon King would not be the trophy of one who seeks battle, and it was Frieren, whom she believed belonged to an era of peace, who greatly contributed to the Demon King's downfall. On the contrary, Fern, whose potential would undoubtedly be an asset in a time of war, uses her power to protect the peace. All that is to say that as the times change, so too will the roster of individuals who can make a difference in the world, regardless of race. The last thing I want to touch on will be brief, but I felt it was pretty worth mentioning. Himmel's dedication towards Frieren. It's not so much about his love for her because it's made pretty clear and we can all see that very well. But his dedication in itself is almost like a separate entity entirely. Obviously he won't outright say it, but the reason he does a lot of what he does when he's alive is so that Frieren won't feel lonely after all her friends are gone. Her outliving them is bound to happen. But knowing this, he does everything he can to stave off the sadness and loneliness that it might bring her. He builds statues, leaves mementos, and makes memories, all of which she is bound to look back at and not feel sadness that the journey is over, but to give her happiness that it ever happened to begin with. That is what this story is trying to tell us, to enjoy things while they last and to live life to the fullest. And for what it's worth, I think that's a very beautiful message to impart. And that brings us to the end of things. So if you made it this far into the video, I greatly appreciate you for watching for so long. Before I watched this show, I would have never thought I'd be making a video on it as detailed and carefully thought out as this one. But I guess I could say the same about a lot of the videos I've made on this channel. Sometimes you watch a movie, a TV show, or in this case an anime, that just leaves a much bigger impact on you than you thought it would or could. And I'd say that pretty accurately describes the experience I had with season 1 of this show. So much so to the point that I figured I could make a pretty interesting video out of it. There's so many things about this story that I didn't even begin to touch on here, so if you're at all interested, I would highly recommend checking out the anime. Season 2 is coming out in about 2 weeks' time at the time of me making this video, so it may already be out as you're watching this. It'd be pretty clutch if I could somehow upload this on the same day season 2 airs, but I guess I'll just have to wait and see if future me makes it in time. But as always, this has been Tenta. Stay easy, guys.